Hello there, Chris here from Becker's Models, and yes, I have made a chess set out of tanks. These are the Zvezda 1/100 scale wargaming tanks, and I selected two teams, the German team and the Russian or Soviet team, because that gave me the correct sort of types and numbers of tanks I needed for the chess pieces. So assembly of these kits was actually surprisingly easy. I mean, they are basic, simple kits, but they had quite a bit of detail on them. I was quite impressed. The kits went together. In fact, me and my kids, we put these together on a rainy weekend, all 32 of them. Took us all weekend to put them together. Some needed glue, some didn't. Some of the wheels fit okay, some didn't. But overall, yeah, not too bad for the scale. I could have gone to 1/72 or 1/76 scale, but that would have been far too big for a normal regulation chessboard. So with all the parts all assembled and cleaned up, I did add a bit of detail here and there to some of the tanks. For example, I added some texture on some of the smooth plastic surfaces, just using an old Mr. Surfacer tin and a little bit of Tamiya glue. I scribed some panel lines on some of the side skirts, and of course drilled out some of the barrels that were completely solid. All in all, pretty easy to just slightly modify those tanks. Time for primer. I just primed them all with a basic grey primer from Steinl-Res. And this went down. This is a perfect primer for this sort of thing, because you're talking about small details, and yeah, they filled every sort of detail. Made a green for the base coat for the Soviets first, out of these four Tamiya acrylic lacquer colors. And yeah, again, it was just a process of modulation. I had to really bump up the normal modulation you would see on a kit. Because these things are so small, they would look dead flat and boring if I just painted them all, you know, the bolt standard 4BO green. So I had to use a fair bit of modulation. So I used some of these life color paints here to, you know, get those highlights. Anything that sticks out, I want to make the color pop, because I did actually weather all of these tanks, believe it or not. So what this process is just hitting all the hatches, the ledges, the little bolts that stand out, and as you can see there, you're getting a little bit more 3D depth, a little bit more volume to the tank. So it's pretty small. Switching over to the German ones, I decided to paint the base color for all those would be the Dunkelgelb, or dark yellow. So yellow went over all of those tanks, as you can see. I don't know why I painted the bottom. You're never going to see it unless you move it. Same process. I used a slightly lighter life color thing with a nice Winsor & Newton very small 00 paintbrush there, and just hit all those highlights, anything that stood out, including even the hubs on those wheels, because it all adds to adding that depth. As you can see, that's the Panzer III, which was the pawn, so I made 8 of those. And now we skip forward, bang, look at that. I had to paint all the details. That took a lot of time, because yeah, it's a lot of time spent under a loop. I even did some chipping, some 2-layered chipping with some basic brown. So I added a gloss coat over these details, just to basically just put a clear coat to protect it all. And then I wanted to prep for washes to give it even more depth. So I used a variety of the Tamiya washes, and as you can see, it's really pooling in there nicely, getting into all those crevices and nooks, just to make a little bit more depth, a little bit more volume, to make it stand out. I think I used dark grey and some brown and some black. And I believe that's a finished Panzer III with chipping all done. And there's the Soviet BT5. And I hand painted that white stripe over the top, just like the real thing, with a bit of chipping with the grey-green and green other sort of colours. And yeah, all done. I believe I put about 4 or 5 matte coats on each of those. So moving to the capital pieces, I guess you could say, for the rooks, for the KV2s, I used, I decided to make a whitewash. So over the 4BO, I just painted some diluted Tamiya white with hairspray chipping, and as you can see, just a basic method here, and it chipped all the way back just to make some variation in the paint, so it looks a little bit different. I think I did the same with the Germans. I used Sturm Tigers for the rooks, and yeah, both of those had the whitewash on there. So there they are, all completed, before I do some other washes and painting wheels and tracks. Here are the Sturm Tigers, again, same technique, hairspray technique. You put hairspray over the matte yellow, and then you put down the diluted white paint, and then with a brush dipped in water, you scratch back all that lovely winter whitewash. And moving on, I decided that each piece needed to have a theme. So for the bishops, I went diagonally. I made diagonal camouflage. So that's an SU-100 for the Soviets. As you can see, the camouflage goes diagonally across. And I've still got some of those modulation effects there for the green. And then for the Jagdpanthers, for the German side, again, same concept. One color, the inverse of the other color, but all put down diagonally. And this is actually fairly accurate. There were some Jagdpanthers painted in that camo technique. I just used Panzer putty there. It's a real simple way to do, bulk putty there. Okay, for the knights, a little bit different, a little bit pushing the boundaries of reality. I made little L stencils. L, or whatever you want to call, for how a knight goes 1 across and 3 up, or whatever which way it can go. And I did it on both. So the T-34s on the Soviet side, they had white, like a white paneling, or a white stripe, so it kind of stretches the truth there. They did have white stripes on them. Whereas for the Panthers, I've got the green ones. And I have seen that camouflage in a other, but with some red, so it's almost correct. So a little bit of chipping here. This is a very simple technique. You just use a bit of sponge chipping over those parts to get some scratches and things in there, just to break it up a little bit. Very quick to do, very easy. And same with the T-34s, I used a bit of green. So you really want to up it. It's the chips are huge, aren't they? I mean, they're not realistic, but you're getting a nice effect. And overall, it'll get dulled down when you put on some of the more metallic chipping. So same here, same concept. I did this to all the pawns as well, so just showing you here how I did it on the bigger pieces. And that's just using a very dark brown to get the sort of metal chips that you see with the heavy use, particularly on the side skirts and on wheels and so forth. All right, moving on to the kings and queens. So this is the king piece, and I decided to do the inverse of the German. So this Soviet one, I think it's the JS2 or JS1. I can't remember. Or JS3. They all look the same to me. I don't know what they are. Anyway, there's the king tiger, and that one I wanted to replicate the octopus sort of camouflage, which you'll see in a minute. But for the queens, and I believe, yep, there's the queen. The queen for the Germans was the tiger, because that makes sense. The king is the king tiger. I hope that makes sense. And for these two, I decided to do triple camo. So these are the only pieces on the board that have 3 colors. That shows how powerful they are. So it was just a very simple red, brown, and a dark yellow, and the base green, or the base yellow, and a green, and a red, brown. Very, very simple. That's just putting layers and layers of very thin Panzer putty and building up the colors nicely to get that sort of effect. And very easy to do. Just got to take your time and get the pressures right on the airbrush. And just there's the yellow going down on the JS3. I think it is a JS3. I think I did my eyesight really bad on these ones. These tanks were tiny, but they had to be. So I managed to get some shots of how I painted the wheels. Some of the wheels were actually separate, but some of them I decided in my mistake to glue them onto the chassis. But just take my time. I was using a loop here, using a magnifier just to get it right. And apart from the interleaved and overlapping German tanks, the Russian ones here, they were really easy to paint the wheels and tires and also the tracks. So not too bad. Yeah, look at this Tiger tank. I had to go over that several times just to get it right. I could have made a stencil, but it was a little bit too small. But yeah, that was a bit of a pain to do. Luckily, I had a lot to do, so if I got a bit bored or a bit tired, I'd switch to something else, especially when you get a lot of eye strain on these so tiny kits. So painting the wheels and painting the tracks, I used basically the same colours on each. And then I went again, here we go, so we've got some more chipping. But no, now I'm trying to do the octopus rings. This is a realistic camouflage. This is exactly what some of these King Tigers had in theatre, and I'm using a 000 brush there to paint those rings. In hindsight, I should have actually made those rings a lot less desaturated. You can just see them there. I would have liked them to pop out a little bit more. And I think I added that to, there we go, I got the dots on the Russian one. So here they all are finished and displayed on their board. I think I made them fairly simple to to understand who's who. So you got the bishop, and you got there's the king tiger, and also put a decal on the top to say this is the king. There's the queen with 3 colours. So here are the finished photos of each of the main pieces. I hope you really enjoyed that sort of segue into a very strange project that I've had brewing for several years now. It was a lot of fun, from building to modifying the parts to actually trying to find a relevant paint scheme that would work and relevant tanks for each individual piece. And all that little bit of chipping and weathering and so forth. It was a really good diversion from doing some of the bigger subjects and, you know, even 1/16 scale armor. So I hope you enjoyed that. And yeah, I put that tank chest set into a local competition about a month or so ago, and it actually won 3rd in the miscellaneous. I couldn't think of any other category to put it in. Maybe I could have, you know, put 32 separate entries in, but no, that was a bit silly. No, I put it in one category on its chessboard, and yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I was glad that I was able to do it. And it has actually been played for the first time. My son got to play it, so with his uncle. So anyway, thanks for watching. See you next time. Cheers.